the power and the brilliance and the awe of our humanity is already in us. We just have to go through our personal experience and almost like the fog of distortion of not really understanding ourselves. And when we see the power and true nature, it's really amazing. Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I am Deborah Burnt Maldonado, and I'm here with Rob Maldonado, the doctor, the good doctor, and we're here to open your mind and help you live a better life.
Continuing our series on the psychology of transformation.
Yes. How do we transform, and what is that about? But before we start, I want to invite you to make sure that you subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, just click the button in the corner. And if you're listening to us on the podcast services such as Spotify, iTunes, and all those wonderful services, don't forget to click subscribe so you do not miss another episode, especially because we do series and you want to get every one because one builds upon the other. And so today's episode is really about accessing your creativity. Like, where does the creativity really come from?
Yeah.
And since we're creative mind, we know something about that. But this well of creativity and what Jung called the collective unconscious. So,
yeah, and I would say that Jung is one of the few, maybe the only one, that really tackles this question of where does creativity come from? How is it that we're able to create all this technology, all this art, all this architecture, cars, spaceships, all this stuff that we create as human beings? And his answer is incredibly profound and controversial. So we'll talk about that.
So when we talk about the collective unconscious, there's a term that a lot of people call about the collective consciousness. What would be the difference between collective consciousness, that term, and the collective unconscious?
Yeah, so the term unconscious, Jung used it to mean that we are not aware of it. It's separate from our conscious experience. So when we're awake and alert right now, he says the center of that experience is the ego. It's the center of how we see the world and how we feel ourselves to be. The unconscious, he says, is unseen at this point, but it's accessible through dreams, through inner work, through visualization, introspection, and through the process of active imagination, which we're going to be talking about.
And so the collective unconscious is...
Yeah, so what is it? It is made up of collective knowledge, the collective knowledge of humankind.
Like universal knowledge?
You can think of it as ancestral knowledge. Just like us individually, right? We can think of, what did I learn in elementary school? What did I learn in high school? What did I learn in college? And we have access to a lot of that knowledge. He says, think about humanity's evolution. And the things that human beings learned along the way. It's been accumulating. And where is it stored? In the collective unconscious. So it's collective because it's not just our individual mind that we're
our personal
accessing.
Experience. It's like we're sitting upon a treasure trove of knowledge, right? Now, does it include, like you said, humanity? But I would say animals have similar patterns. Yeah. And since we evolved from animals, wouldn't it be from every part of evolution?
Yes, that's a good point. He would definitely say that. I think his primary work focused on what he called these incredible religious symbols and spiritual symbols that you could identify in different cultures throughout different times.
Like the pyramids. You go wherever you go in the world, there's pyramids, and they never had communication with each other. So where did that knowledge come from, building something that reaches the sky?
Yeah, and most people would think, well, there's no scientific basis for this, but it's really the opposite. There is pretty good scientific data now that suggests that's the way it works. It's called epigenetics. Our genes code for experience, and then that code is transmitted to our children and to their children and so forth, which means that there is a mechanism for ancestral memories to be passed down to us. And so he was ahead of his time. He was more working on the theoretical basis and philosophical basis of what the mind is, but he was on track in a lot of things. He got a lot of things wrong, of course, and now we have more information from Eastern philosophy, anthropology, archaeology, that some of it is supported, some of it is not. But he considered himself a scientist, so he didn't. I don't think he would mind us saying, "You got this wrong." I mean, that's essentially what a scientist does, is
challenge the assumptions.
Yes, right? Try to disprove a lot of the assumptions that they're making.
So this knowledge is like a lot of uncover, because a lot of people talk about epigenetics when it comes to trauma, like, got passed down generational trauma, but we're missing out if we're only focusing on that little piece of the brokenness. Like, we're missing out on all the wisdom. Can you imagine deep within the early days of man, we have that knowledge of what it feels like to feel the grass beneath our feet, to worship and wonder what the stars mean, and have these rituals. That's why sometimes we feel when we go to different places and experience different rituals, we feel like a little affinity to some of them, and just like it feels familiar to us. Wow. So I think there's definitely that collectiveness there. I went when I was in Denver. I went to this Indigenous Healers Conference when I was into all that stuff, and the healers all from all over the world, the shamans, they all got together, and they were all sharing that they actually had this very similar rituals, and they came from all over the planet. And so they were like, there's some intelligence here that is keeping us all together and kind of helping us work with this thing called human life. And so it's very spiritual to know that we are that connected to so much.
Yeah, the other factor about the collective unconscious is it can only be accessed after you do shadow work. And we know from our own experience and in working with many people, before you do shadow work, all you're seeing is your own conditioned mind. The symbols and images that appear may be from the collective unconscious, but you're interpreting them, you're experiencing them from your personal experience, from your subjective point of view, and that renders them useless as far as their creative potential.
It's like if you grew up in a hometown and you only lived in that hometown and you never had access to an outside world, and you made all your decisions based on what you learned just in that town, and then no access to other cultures, other information, other points of view, other societies, other people. You're just kind of stuck in this, like the familiar. That's kind of what it's like if you're just working with your conditioning. It's a very narrow, limited, again, not having a lot of choice, because they're only seeing just a tiny piece of the world. And what's possible for you and yourself.
Yes. And the other factor that we want to always consider in talking about the collective unconscious is that it is where we encounter the archetypes. And these are often, well, let's say they're not so much that they're misused or misunderstood, but that people have taken the concept and expanded it into their fields. We know people that do marketing or branding now, they use the concept of the word archetype to talk about their branding strategies. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we're talking about.
Like the
here.
brand's personality is like the jester or the king, that kind of thing.
Yeah, here we're talking about Jung's psychology of individuation, meaning what was he talking about when he was talking about this personal transformation of tapping into deeper layers of our unconscious mind what do the archetypes mean for us in that respect.
And so just like we have our familiarity with our town and our functions of our, life and how we like our emotions and we in humanity, we share a lot of information of just life, we have grief. I understand what that is. So we have some idea of what kind of our personal experience is. And so when we're working on the archetype, it's all this like beyond what we experienced before, this other realm, like outside of the Shire, outside of your hometown. Imagine that you were exposed to a completely new world and a new experience that was beyond what you experienced before. And that's really the power of the archetype.
Yeah. And as modern science starts to investigate consciousness and the nature of consciousness, Jung's work is becoming more relevant again because that's what he was talking about. He was saying it's an idealism. It's the understanding that the psyche is creating our human experience. It is the source of our human technology and art and science. Everything is coming through psyche. There is no place else it can come from. It is the source of that creative power.
There's a term, a description of the archetype. It's like the original kind of template. That kind of we can't really see, like when you make a copy of a copy of a copy. So an archetype is kind of a structure that's universal. So a mother, a father, the idea of a house, the idea of a chair. All these are archetypes. They're things that we can find in many different shapes and sizes and forms and experiences. But there's a commonality to it. We have these kind of ways we live in the universe. There's an up and a down. There's a sky and there's the earth. There's a tree. There's animals. There's plants. They're all archetypes. There's many different trees, many different types of animals, many different views of the sky, and so it really is this universal template, like the ground, like the framework of how we experience the world. But then we all have that ability to go deeper into the source of that archetypal pattern. And what happens is that our personal life gets collapsed into that archetype and covers it up, where we just kind of don't even see the archetype anymore. We just think it's just that other person or my personality. And the archetype is something we can't really see directly. All we can see is its symbols.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you reminded me of something this morning that Michelangelo kind of understood this principle. He said, I'm not the creator of these things. I'm simply kind of lending my body to do the work in revealing the power that's there.
He said God created the David. God created the David. The David was already inside the stone. It was just my job to chip away the excess. And that's kind of what we're here, is the power and the brilliance and the awe of our humanity is already in us. We just have to go through our personal experience and almost like the fog of distortion of not really understanding ourselves. And when we see the power and true nature, it's really amazing what we're sitting on. And most people don't go there, or they don't access it. They're too busy, looking externally, looking in the world.
Yeah, and you can't go there unless you do shadow work, because again, before shadow work, you believe you are the persona. You believe you are simply an individual. You're not connected to deeper realms of existence. There's no spirit for you. There's no aliveness in the universe. You're simply housed inside your body, and you're limited to that. And
you're kind of you're like another object in the world, interacting with other objects.
Yes.
But not connected to anything.
After shadow work, after you integrate the shadow, that you drop that over-identification with a persona, with your limited role as a human being. You're not pushing it away. You're not denying it, but you're understanding it's a function of your mind.
It's a part of you, not all of you. Right?
That's right. Then that allows you to connect to these deeper layers of what Jung called the collective unconscious. And it is a source of creativity, because these archetypal patterns that are there, ancient, that they've they predate the human race, essentially. What coming into relationship with these archetypes means is that you're borrowing or channeling their power. You're actually now influenced by and moved by these powerful symbols that arise from deep within the unconscious mind.
Well, before shadow work, the power kind of runs you, basically. Like the forces that we have are unconsciously driving us as well.
Yeah.
And then after shadow work, we can kind of make partners with it, these archetypes, or like kind of use its power and redirect it and kind of have a little more steering control. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Jung talks about it as a relationship, very similar to human relationships, where if you're in a relationship with someone, it's a give and take. It's not all about you taking
Your
and
agenda.
receiving.
Yeah.
You have to give back. You have to explain what you're up to. What is it? Why do you need this information? Why do you need this knowledge? Why do you need to create art or science or technology? And then the collective unconscious, these symbols of transformation that arise from the unconscious, give you that power, give you that information in relationship to you honoring them or being kind of respectful of their power. That this power is coming from somewhere beyond your individual existence. That's why often
it's like in awe, like you're in awe, like instead of you're humbled by it versus that you're arrogant, that I'm creating all this stuff and I'm manifesting this and I'm doing this and I'm, it's like, no, it's a partnership.
Great artists always acknowledge that they're simply the vehicles for these things. They feel it, that I didn't invent this, like logically sit down and kind of write these things out or create these things. They come through me.
Well, I was telling you this morning, we were talking about projection and that I said, some people, they tell me, I really love when you said this, and that really, changed me. And I don't even remember saying it. And it's like as if Debbie was not there or something else came in. That's this universal intelligence. It's not the persona, is speaking through you. And the more you grow, and the more you go beyond the shadow and go into these deeper realms of the psyche, you have access to this intuition, this knowledge that just kind of flows through you. And, I think artists have that capacity. Sometimes they're able to like put their ego aside and tap in. Would you say that that's what they're really doing is when they create a drawing, these natural archetypes come through? I know for me, as a writer, when I would write fiction, all these archetypes, like I wouldn't be like, oh, this or that. I would just be like, the characters kind of fell into these archetypal patterns. Yeah. And it wasn't me kind of being aware of archetypes, but I look back now and I say, oh yeah, I could see that. And you see this in movies and screenplays. It come in stories and books. These stories come with this archetypal pattern that is where did that come from? We didn't consciously create it. So very, very fascinating.
Yeah, Jung psychology has allowed us to understand literature, cinema, technology, all the creative arts and sciences in a deeper way. We understand now that these patterns are arising from this deep source of the collective unconscious, and they come through visions, through symbols, through dreams, through inspiration. Of course, people are inspired, they're possessed by creative ideas, and they have to do these things. They're compelled to do these things. But the more we understand them, the more we can help people access this creativity in a creative, positive way. We know of artists that are consumed or destroyed even by this power sometimes because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't understand its psychology. And so to them it feels like, like a foreign possession. Like
Mozart, he was like obsessed with, writing his music, and he was deaf even at the last year or two of his life.
Oh, you're talking about Beethoven.
Beethoven, sorry. And Mozart, I'm thinking of Amadeus. Yeah, and the fact that, he was be able to create this music. Like, where did it come from? He wasn't hearing it with his senses. But I think one of the greatest, kind of simplest ways we can understand the collective unconscious is something very accessible to us, which is that anima animus. This idea that for the anima, when we talk about artists, the male artists have a muse. There's always a woman, this image of a woman, and that's this anima, this universal mother, this universal woman that almost possesses them in a way, that kind of inspires them.
Very much so. So Jung psychology, and in the process of individuation, he says the first task is to integrate the shadow. And that's the ticket into the larger realm of the collective unconscious. Because the shadow is the personal unconscious. It all has to do with your personal history. Beyond that, he says, we enter into the collective unconscious, where these powerful archetypal images and symbols then transform our awareness, our perception of the world, because they connect us to the universe. We no longer see ourselves separate from the world. We see that it is one process. Psyche and world, psyche and universe are essentially one.
Like, we are the universe, and we have access. It's not something we have to go off and travel to see. We can experience it every night.
Yeah, this is also explained in the Upanishads. It says, as you become enlightened, as you free your mind from past conditioning, you experience the true self within you. And it says the true self is let's say it sees everything as itself. So trees, other people, animals, mountains, clouds, it sees as, oh, that's a reflection of me, of who I am, that pure awareness that is there creating these things. And that's why Jung was considered a mystic by many people, but he was simply explaining what is the psychology of these deeper experiences that human beings have, and how can we account for them with our modern psychology.
And so we were going to talk about the anima animus.
Oh, yes. So the world in its form is often referred to as Mother Earth, right?
The Great Mother.
The Great Mothers. So Jung says this is an archetype, the archetype of the mother, the element of sustenance, of material, the one that gives us comfort, warmth, the fire, the food that sustains our bodies, the whole physical comfort of the world, right? How it takes care of us and sustain us. It's the principle of mother. Many of the early images that we found, or that we have as humans have found in archaeology, are of these mother archetypes. You know, in other words, the mother was the first religious principle that was worshipped.
There's a great book by Joseph Campbell called The Goddesses, and he talks about how the goddess was it was a female figure that was the initial god that they worshipped, and then she kind of got shoved to the corner throughout history as the male god. The image came through, but yeah, this I think because back when we were just young humanity, we relied on the earth so much as our source of sustenance.
We still do.
Well, we still do, but I mean, they didn't have like technology. Like, I guess it still comes from the earth, but they had to be so connected to the earth, and the earth gave back to them, and the earth, the nature was more an integral part of their life compared to now, where we're in houses and sidewalks and streets and office buildings. We don't have that kind of love of the mother that's why we need to go on these like spiritual retreats and go to these, jungle places or beaches or somewhere where we can lose ourselves in the desert, because there's a part of us in the deep wisdom that wants to connect to that mother.
Yeah, I mean, this was precisely Jung's point in developing his psychology of individuation. He said, just because we isolate ourselves through technology and through material culture from nature, it doesn't mean we're free from that need. The psychological need is still there. So he says the psychology of individuation allows us to tap into that deeper process that's still there in an individual psychological way. So how does that work? He says, look inside as you go inward through shadow work. After you do your shadow work, you start to pay attention to your dreams, to the unconscious mind, and it will give you a symbol that will represent that process of relating to these archetypal elements. And that, he says, is primarily the anima or the animus, the mother figure or the great spirit God. And these are symbols that arise from the unconscious mind through dreams, through visions, through meditation, and that in relationship to them, then you are guided on your inner journey of transformation.
And one thing to know, you'll know a universal symbol is it's something that's not familiar in your experience in life. So you see this goddess woman or a mother that's very different than your mother. It's like, oh, okay, this is something new or a new place that you've never been. I remember, and I'm really amazed at the symbols that show up in my dreams because I don't have any personal experience with them. I remember I got a pine cone from my Animus in a dream. And I was like, a pine cone, that's an interesting shape. It was all gold. And when I did research on it, it was actually, it represents the divine. And it's like the mandala, with all the fractals. And if you look at the Catholic Church, they have pine cones like as the top of their kind of staffs is the pine cone. And I was like, oh, that is really interesting. And so it didn't come from my memory. It came from another place. So I really like the idea that when you think about something, it's either a dream can come from your memory and the day, it's like ordinary dreams, or these archetypal dreams, they come from something outside of your memory. And really, really cool when this happens because you're like, wow. And then I feel the dreams really show me this like connection to that deeper part. Like, how do we connect to the collective unconscious? Is dreams is like that direct highway right there. And it makes you feel that, like you said, you're not alone in the world. There's this intelligence that's basically listening and feeding back to you wisdom that you need. And it's you, but it's another you. It's a bigger you. And so it's really a beautiful process, very spiritual, very, mystical, that you can go to every night of your life. And you don't have to do anything crazy to do it. You just fall asleep and just be open, and the dreams will show you. And a lot of times people don't understand what their dream meant. They think it's just, they throw it away, and we want to pay attention to them because they have so much richness to them, right?
Yeah, and that's what Jung did with his work as well, is that he gave us a way to understand this function of the psyche that is very foreign to our conscious mind. Because it is the opposite of our conscious awareness. So if you think, what does our conscious awareness do? It gives us logic, understanding, reason. The unconscious is the opposite. It's not going to be reasonable. It's not going to be logical. It's going to speak in a very emotional, funny, imaginative, symbolic, visual way. We've all experienced dreams where we come out saying, oh my God, what was that about? It was so bizarre. But it's that symbolic language that's speaking to us continuously. But we have to understand it. We have to pay attention and learn how it speaks. It's
so interesting. If you think about Paul McCartney, they asked him that song, Let It Be, where did he get it from? And he said he had a dream about his mother Mary, spoke to him and told him to let it be, because he was struggling with letting go of the Beatles and all that. And so he wrote the song from that. And yesterday, actually, the tune the music came to him in a dream. So it's this other creative force within us that's like feeding us information. And if we're not able to access it, we're missing out on so much. And you hear so many stories of dreams inspiring people like James Cameron. Avatar was from a dream. He dreamt this kind of mystical place, and then he wrote the screenplay. This like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and he just kept it for when he was ready. But it's like when you see that movie Avatar, you're like watching someone else's experience in a dream. Like, where did he come up with these creatures and this world that's so different? It comes from that creativity. And so beyond what we rationally and logically and through memory experience, there's this wealth of untapped creativity that the collective unconscious has for us.
Absolutely. And so if this anima represents a mother, and it represents the world, we see it in the way we relate to the world. Our understanding and our inner relationship to the mother archetype or the anima in us is the way we experience the world, the physical world. Now, the way we experience the spiritual world has to do more with the animus.
The male, the father.
The male energy or the father principle. It is the unseen spirit that moves the world, that moves the clouds and invisibly kind of moves the energy around.
It's like the yin and the yang, those two.
Yes. And a lot of people get caught up in the masculine and feminine, but Jung was simply talking about these deeper forces and deeper concepts that he saw in many spiritual traditions. From
that duality, right? The duality, and then the integration of duality is alchemy. You know, the two forces coming together, creating a third, like a couple coming together, having a baby, birth, rebirth, those type of symbols.
Yeah, so together they account for a lot of what we see in human culture. That we have this conflict with the material world. In general, people don't seem to fit in anymore, right? They feel at odds with nature. They feel like, oh, nature's either trying to get me or I don't belong in nature. I can protect myself in the city and be in houses and buildings and things like that.
Where I can just use up all its resources and, drain it of gas and minerals and, just leave it, destroy crops and all those things.
You see, exactly. You see that these our relationship to these archetypal elements in the psyche have an important impact in the way we then relate to our physical world.
Do you think it's like this idea that, and I'm just throwing this out there, this anger at just being conscious, like this kind of resentment for having to live in this world and deal with this world, like almost like an unconscious resentment in a way? Humanity, because if you look at, we're not taking care of it, as a whole. Maybe you're recycling and all those things.
Well, I would say, remember that most people have not done shadow work, and so they're simply operating out of conditioning.
So the ego and survival and short-term payoffs versus long-term investments.
That's right. So they do not see themselves as having the power to have an impact on the way human beings interact with nature and the planet in general. They see themselves as powerless individuals, right? How am I to help the situation if I am just a puny human being and one kind of person amongst billions of people?
Just trying to survive.
Yes. Whereas the individuation process, what it's meant to do is to empower you through understanding that it's the power of ideas that gives you the power to transform societies in the world.
So really what you're saying is that in order for us to change the world, save the planet, instead of not also doing all the things we need to do out there, like recycle or conserve, drive electric cars or whatever it is what we want to do, not eat chemicals, eat natural foods, all those things. But what we really want to do is we want to individuate and encourage others too, because that's really going to bring balance back to the world. Is the outer world is just reflecting our own inner conflict?
Exactly. That was Jung's idea. It's not my original idea.
100 years ago.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was definitely ahead of his time, and he saw where humans were going to. I mean, he was alive during the development of the nuclear bomb and the first detonation in World War II. He saw that human beings, if we continue along this path, there's trouble up ahead, right? He said, what if something goes wrong with the psyche? Because that's the source of the problem. The problem is not out there. It's not technology. It's not war.
We haven't probably the technology to save the planet right now.
We have the psychology. We have the technology to correct all these problems. But because people are still caught up in their ego and their persona, they believe they are these roles that they're playing, they're not able to exert their creative power.
Well, even just think about in general, how many people don't live their fullest life. They're in jobs they don't really love, but they're clinging to it for the steady paycheck and not able to take that leap and start their own business or do something they love because it's just so conditioned in you that you have to follow the rules. And so you're not allowing yourself to have that innovation and that inspiration come out that won't come out if you're still playing in that conditioned self.
That's right. So, I mean, in general, I'm very optimistic. Again, because we have the tools, the psychological tools, the technological tools to make these corrections and transformations. But we know we have to get more people to individuate, right? To stop projecting their shadow onto others, because that is the source of a lot of our conflicts as human beings, is that we are acting and projecting the shadow and then fighting ourselves.
We're having a fight with ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah, it's that inner fight that we're struggling with. And so, what we really, how do we do this is we have to do shadow work. We also have to look at our dreams. And then we have to look at our projections and just everyday life, like what triggers us and what are we seeing out there? And then acknowledging that what I'm seeing out there is a reflective of my own mind. So it's a part of myself that I'm seeing that I'm not conscious of, that I have a conflict with. And the more we can work in our just little world and our little kind of our personal life, get that together as far as like empowerment, then we can take on the bigger pictures. But I think a lot of times people want to save the world and to distract them from working on themselves. Like they want to go out and they want to do some great things in the world, but they don't take care of the inner stuff. And then they end up still fighting and having, like even well-meaning people that want to change society. There can be like an anger or like a projection that they're not aware of. And so it doesn't really help to change it out there until you change inside. And that's really the key. And then everything becomes easier because you're going to have that intuition, that innovation, imagination comes in to help you instead of your ego rational mind trying to solve the world's problems. The little executive functioning of your brain that's only processing what you experience. There's this other realm of intelligence available.
Yeah, so to wrap it up, we talk about how do we do this? How do we access this the source of creativity, which is the collective unconscious? One is introspection. And introspection, we've seen it in many, many traditions. It's the looking inward, looking at our own heart, our own soul. What is our path? What is our purpose on earth? If we don't ask those questions and find a way to do that, then we remain tied to our conditioning, meaning all those past experiences call the shots as to how we're going to act in the moment. Introspection gives us that freedom. Integration of the shadow liberates us from past conditioning. The second principle, dreams and active imagination. As we start to receive these deeper transformative symbols from the collective unconscious, we use active imagination to ask, how do we apply these symbols in our everyday life? What do we do with them? What technologies do we create? What kind of businesses can we create using these powerful symbols? And the third one is depending on the power and the wisdom of the self, the higher self. Many people call this the true self. And in many traditions, including the Upanishads, the self is really what is the treasure that we're seeking. It's not happiness, it's not money, it's not romantic love. It says the self is the true purpose of our life, our existence here on earth. It is to find
know ourself, our true self.
That's right. And it is essentially, it's saying you are the self already, but you have to realize it. Because that covering and that appearance of the ego and the persona, it acts like a covering. It covers over the true self.
Well, it's so interesting as you're saying that. When you think, speaking of archetypes and patterns, every story that you hear is the god that falls down from heaven and is a human being, and he forgets that he's a god. And there's all those stories that he forgets who he is. So even Moses forgot that he was the king, or he was just a boy. There's all these stories.
The Lion King.
Yeah, the Lion King. I forgot who I am. You're the king. And so there's a lot of in myths. These archetypal patterns talking about individuation all the time, talking about these principles. And if we really understand this path and the stages, and then you start to watch, be in culture and popular culture, you start to see that they're really everywhere. And it's just sort of like putting all the dots together and understanding it in a deeper way. So very, very powerful. And a journey you're meant to be on, a journey that is your birthright. You shouldn't live your whole life just on the surface, and feeling like you're scraping through life. Like it shouldn't be a struggle. It shouldn't be painful. It should be a ride, a journey, and a creative endeavor.
Yeah. Ultimately, Jung's work, especially individuation, leads us to feeling empowered and feeling freedom, liberation from the constraints of the ego, of the persona.
So thank you for listening. It's been a great series, and we'll see you next week. Before you go, please, if you haven't done so, subscribe here. Click on the button in the corner here on the video if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you're listening to us on the podcast services, iTunes, Spotify, all those other great services, make sure you subscribe before you end. Leave us today so we can see you next week for another episode of Soul Sessions.